First, let me introduce Nikki Lerner. Nikki Lerner is a culture coach. She builds multicultural leaders and empowers cultural competency tools to move from monocultural to healthy multicultural spaces. She has 20 years of practical experience building multicultural organizations, leaders, and teams. She's a culture coach, artist, teacher, speaker, and author, helping others engage with one another relationally across cultural lines. Her passion is to see people come to an understanding of one another through healthy dialogue aimed at learning, growing, and remaining human with one another through extraordinary multicultural leadership. And she will tell us a bit about her services at the end here. So if you're interested in more, we will have a chance to hear about that. And then we have Joy Lee. Joy is the program administrator at the Masters for Humanitarian and Disaster Leadership program at Wheaton College. She cares deeply about faith-based humanitarian education, art as a psychosocial care, gender-based violence issues, racial justice, and creating space for peace work. She has worked on projects in different mediums such as Tom Memories of Nanking, in sundry languages, Make Food, Not War, and Everything Will Live Where the River Goes. So these are art projects. So I'm excited that both of you are sort of in the art space as well, and I hope you can touch on that. I think it's a great conversation. I just introduced you, but if there's anything else you'd like to add about your work and your ministry, and why being an advocate in this space matters so much to you personally. So really speaking from your personal experience. Let's get started with Nikki. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be with you all today. This is important to me because I know what it feels like to be overlooked, unseen, and to have assumptions made about you. And so do you. You all know what that feels like too. And I remember as a young person, I grew up in a tricultural family, although we were all Black American people. My biological father's family was from rural Virginia in the country here in the US. My mother's family was very diverse, with a diverse come from. And after my father died when I was 1, my mom remarried when I was 3, and my step family is from inner city Baltimore here in the U.S. And so those are 3 completely different cultures, and I always felt like I was the one in the middle trying to help everybody understand one another. It was very challenging and very difficult, and feeling very much like an outsider, even in my own family at times, is certainly the core of knowing that I think as I started to grow up, I know I had sort of made this pact with myself that at least when people would engage with me, that they would always know that in that moment they are seen, that there is room made for them, and that I think really I was trying to not have anybody else feel the way that I felt, particularly as a young person. And so that's why it matters to me. And building the skill of multicultural leadership is the most relevant skill we can build right now. We are getting more diverse, not less. We're not going backwards. And so we need to learn the skill set so that we can start some new practices with people in our organizations. That's why I'm passionate about it.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks. I'm so glad to be here and just have this conversation with everybody. Ditto, Nikki. I mean, just having experience being unseen and made assumptions about. And also I still currently look relatively young. And so I've been in spaces where that I get, I just get challenged on a lot of things or completely dismissed. One time I was teaching a class in a particular classroom, and a colleague, this is another institution I was at, just came into the classroom and disregarded the fact that I was in the middle of a class and wanted to show some guests of his that he wanted to just, show this person, these people, this classroom in the middle, like, and then patted my head. So that was also just so that physical, the coming into my space, the disregarding. So that's one example of how I've experienced some of this dismissal, unseen, and assumptions. Um, and so similarly, I would not like, to have our future leaders who are women in relief and development experience that to then begin to think about advocating for themselves, right? And secondly, I think it's, we're all made in the image of God, and co-laboring is important. And as people who are made in the image of God, we should be thinking about belonging together and what that means to work towards that together, and how theology plays a role in how we've not thought about how it's shaped the way we engage with each other's gender and different identities. So, um, yeah, I mean that's succinctly uh, why I think that's really important. And then just a little bit about myself that's not in the bio is that I'm a 1.5 generation in North America, so I'm Singaporean North American, and a lot of my background in humanitarian justice issues on World War II in Asia had been culturally formative for me diving into thinking about humanitarian work from a Christian perspective.
Thank you both for sharing that. And that tells you about the deep understanding that both our panelists have working with others, bringing themselves, but this experience they've had working in this space. So this is really valuable for us. So we have all collectively been working in this space for a long time, and we hold in tension the fact that othering is us an original sin, and it's sort of always going to be here. Yet we've also made some progress. So we hold, I think, all of us those truths in intention. We have made some progress. So let's start on that positive note. What are the improvements that you both have seen as a result of this work of advocacy and partnering with organizations and individuals in this space? Maybe Joy, first to you.
Sure, thank you. Um, yes, I have seen improvements in the sense that in my context and with people I've interacted with, I think more and more I'm seeing other people at the table recognizing that who's not there. So not that I have to constantly be that person to say like, oh, what about this other voice? Have we thought about, I'm seeing other people recognizing and posing that question. Um, and then at the same time, I'm also seeing whether it's younger or folks who have been experienced in the field feeling more safe in their skin to speak out more. Whether that's someone because they're younger and their formation has just been a little bit different, or someone who's been in the field for 10, 15 years and have finally been like, it's time. Like I really need to be speaking up, whether, and what I've seen too is like a safe like workspace environment is conducive for that, but also women who are speaking out and taking a risk because it may not be safe for them in their role, in their position, to be pointing out and calling out things that need to be transformed and changed.
I think I'm gonna stay super practical here. In my answer is I think investing organizational resource. Um, I mean, how long have people been trying to address these things in this work and have had no resource in their organization to be able to address it? Not only no resource, but no authority. Now, no authority still exists, by the way, but having people invest money and time and priorities into this work is something that I have seen in a way that I haven't seen prior in my work. I mean, I remember, particularly before 2020, um, you know, I might contact a leader, a senior leader, and say, hey, I remember you mentioned that you want to get better at this. You want to talk on Tuesday? And they're like, we're still praying about it, which is my favorite faith-based excuse. My favorite. We're praying about it. Okay. All right. So when you go and finish praying, is there a date on the calendar? Because you've been praying for 40 days and 40 nights and you still don't have an answer. And I think God speaks quicker than that. I love that. That was before 2020. And then 2020 happened, right? For better, for worse. And, that same person was calling me saying, hey, could we speak on Tuesday? So that being said, no matter what the catalyst is or was, what I do think is working is the investment of resources, money, time, and priority.
That's a great testimony that the work that organizational leaders are deciding to invest is giving us some fruit. And those of us who are our colleagues and participants here outside of the US, 2020 alludes to the um, George Floyd protests. And I don't know if this was in your media at the time, but it was like sort of the racial tensions and the protests that ensued that really awoke many people to the realities of minority Americans. And many organizational leaders decided that that was an important moment for them to get involved. Whether it was a sustainable moment or not, that is still out. The jury's still out on that. But as Nikki's speaking, many organizations did decide to take that step at that time. So that's a great testimony. I'd love to hear from both of you at the both at the organizational level, but then also if you were to speak on this call to someone who's an organizational leader and they're looking at individuals in their organization and they're trying to decipher, okay, what are some of the pain points this person working on my team? And we cannot generalize, but what are some of the issues that folks are still experiencing, having as their day-to-day? So both at those levels, both organizational and individual, what are the pain points you're seeing right now?
A couple things. One is leaning into their own fear. What I'm finding, whether the conversation is around how the organizational culture and the work affects minority cultures, either in the US or in other places around the world, is this fear of leaders not wanting to be on the hook for the work. So what's happening is nobody wants to be on the hook if it doesn't go well. And so that is a pain point, whether leaders know it or not. That is a pain point for an organization if nobody owns it because of fear. What if I get it wrong? Particularly for people in dominant cultures. What if I get it wrong? What if I say the wrong thing? Am I going to get canceled? What does this have to do with anything Jesus related in the faith sector? Those kinds of things. And so you, as a leader, leaders given to fear over and over again and think about that over and over and over again. And while they're overthinking it, impact is still happening. So that's a pain point. And the second pain point I would bring up is particularly for women and minorities, no matter where you are, is uh, not being able to connect to our desire for what we want and then actually going and asking for it. That is a huge pain point. Because for a lot of women, a lot of minorities, we carry around this burden of, you know what? It took me a lot of effort and hard work to get here. I'm in this position. There's no way I'm messing this up. Right. And so then we still go unfulfilled in our organizations and not ask for what we want. And that is a big tension and a big pain point, particularly for women in an organization.
Can you say a bit more about that, Nikki? Like those desires, that are those things like work-life balance? What are those things that people desire, like they don't want to give up? How are you seeing that?
Oftentimes with the leaders that I work with, particularly women, but also minority leaders, because of how intersectionality affects us. For many of us, we have worked really hard over the years in our within our organizations to move into positions where we have some sort of authority. And particularly for a lot of women, because of the way that we have been socialized in a lot of our cultures, is that it's not okay for us to connect to our own desires, even about work. How do you want to lead? How much authority do you want to have? What kind of change do you want to make in your organization and in the world? And so, if we don't connect to that desire, or if we downplay our own desires, our own work desires, our own ambition, we will not ask for what we want in our organizations in order to make the change that we want to make. I talk to a lot of fearful women
Mm.
in positions who are afraid to push, who are afraid to walk into their manager's office or walk into their senior leadership's office and ask for what they want and what they need so that their team can perform well, so that they can perform well because of fear and the way that we're socialized. That is still a pain point.
And that then leads to burnout and a lot of dissatisfaction around work.
And a lot and the worst thing is a lot of resentment. And so what
Mm.
happens is we're sitting around resenting where we are in our organizations. But the reality is, anytime we feel resentment, the question to ask ourselves is, have we asked enough? Have we asked for what we want? Are we waiting for somebody else to do what we need to do, or to recognize our desire, or to, move us up? That's not going to happen, at least
Mm.
not in the next 15 years. I don't know about y'all, but that's not going to happen. So the time is now to do that, but it's a serious pain point because of the way that we're programmed and socialized is a heavy burden at times.
Joy, what pain points are you seeing?
Yeah, and this I'm gonna sort of connect to a conversation that we were just starting to have in our small groups there, in just thinking about like the space that is not changing or changing, especially as I'm thinking about the younger women that are in going through, the master's degree program, or some of them who are pivoting, sort of like newer into the humanitarian and relief space, Christian humanitarian relief space. And something I was thinking through is, how do we say, you're in this educational space and you're empowered, because I was just saying about 85% of our master's degrees graduates are women, right? And we want them to lead and shape in the spaces that they go into. Um, and they're empowered to do that, in the program. But then as you enter the workspace, you're finding, a very different context, right? You're facing different the barriers. And so what that is, as I'm thinking about it, is how to sort of shape and support young emerging leaders as they face discouragement, as they enter um, the context that they can't feel like they know how to advocate for themselves, or it's not what they think it is. Um, and what do you do when you're new? Because Nikki, you're saying, right, like you go into a space and you ask for, what you hope, you connect to that desire, but you just started. So, for how long should you stay in an organization where you feel like, when can I move up to that authority, that a level of authority where you can start making some decisions and ask for things. And maybe you start there and you don't feel like you can ask for things. So how do you manage thinking about that? And I think that is an issue, and a pain point for younger emerging leaders. And then at the same point, I think about Asian American women, and I don't see a lot working in humanitarian relief in sort of a North American space, who are leading. I can think of like a handful of them. And Kathy Kong's book, one of her, it's a Speak Up book that I was, really encouraged by kind of, builds that connection in thinking about our cultural upbringing and what we've learned about patriarchy and what we've learned about in our home life of um, how and when we should speak up or when we shouldn't speak up has been really important for me. And then important for me in encouraging other Asian American women in their spaces um, to ask and to be thinking even about not just themselves, but what it means to take on mentees. And I think that's another thing that I see is not having that space or those opportunities for mentorship, for like real mentorship, to happen.
When and I think this is a question a lot of us, even not as young professionals, but senior, more seasoned leaders, when do we overcome fear, like you're saying, and when do we decide to go? When do we see that the organizational culture is not going to change and we are burning ourselves out, sacrificing ourselves? So you both alluded to this, but I would love to hear what thoughts you have. When do we stay and when do we overcome fear?
Well, I'll share this is that we were sharing this in our small group. Y- Fear is always going to be a companion. It's not going anywhere. And oftentimes I think we're waiting for the fear to dissipate before we move. And so I think we just have to be okay with fear being a companion, whether we like that companion or not. It's like the sister you never asked for, right? Like, it's gonna be there because we're human and that's how we're made. So, if that's the case, then how do we reframe it? And can fear become a cue to move? Because I don't know about you all, but I know for me, when I am taking action, I'm not afraid because I'm
Mm,
too busy taking action.
mm,
Right? Like if there's a phone call I have to make, I could sit here for 5 minutes and overthink it and be afraid of it and not do it. Or I could just go ahead and get to it and make it. Because while I'm making it, I'm not afraid. Right? The brain can't be like, it can't do both of those things at the same time. Like literally, it can't process that, right? So fear is always going to be there. What I believe that we need to get really good at as people, but particularly as women, is we need to know who we are and what our mission is in the world, apart from the organization that we work with. The organization that you work for is a vehicle right now. It may not be forever, but sometimes we can treat it like it's forever. It may not be forever. And so, if the organization that you work for right now is actually hindering the
mhm,
call that you have on your life, it's worth poking. Is it time to go? Also, I would say is that sometimes, and this is how we need to know ourselves, is we quit too fast. We quit before we have done everything we could do. We quit before we've made all the asks, right? And so we'll leave an organization and be like, it wasn't for me. And we never asked a question of anybody or pushed or tried anything. That is what we need to know is, are we leaving or want to leave because it's actually hindering us from the best work that we can do? Or have we really exhausted every possibility and then said, okay, where is the next vehicle for me? I had to do that in my pastoral ministry. I was at a church that was at the time relatively progressive. I have a different definition of that now. But it was, but still, like, I still didn't think the church was as progressive as it could be around the way that it thought about women, and the way that it thought about people from other communities. And so for me, I'm like, my position here, while I love it, is actually hindering the expansiveness of who I know God wants me to be and the work that I know God wants me to do. And that was part of my departure. So we have to know that as people.
mhm.
And
Thank you,
Joy,
Nikki.
can I jump in here, because you said something. I read a quote that you gave that sort of speaks to this issue. It's also like that our individual trauma and our journeys can inform, you know, some of those things. Like we may have this calling and a desire, but sort of it's not right now because we still have some healing to do. And so I'd love to hear you kind of chime into the same question with that thought.
Yeah, thank you, Ava. I was just gonna jump on that and thinking about quitting too soon and thinking about like so much comes to knowing yourself. And I just want to reiterate, like, amen. Because we have a vocation and professional development class, and so much we're thinking through is your vocation and your career are two things, right? God's called you towards something that's bigger, that's longer, that's part of this bigger picture. And your professional development, your career, as you mentioned, Nikki, is a vehicle, and that can change, that can shift. And it could change so dramatically, but your vocation can still be the same. And so this as we talk about trauma and wanting to thrive in a workplace for yourself, but also for the work that you do, this self-awareness of knowing when you push, right, you ask the questions, you sort of go forth, and then when is it not post-traumatic growth, I think, is the question. um and this comes down to a lot of knowing yourself and your coping mechanisms. And is it beyond coping, right? Is it actually harmful to your psychosocial wellness that you cannot do a good job in this role? And that is not conducive for you anymore. And sometimes when I was speaking about that, Ava, I was thinking more on some issues, right? If you're thinking about gender-based violence, for example, some folks really care deeply about it, but just in their life experience, um, have a lot of processing and a lot for themselves, to continue in that work. So then the question is, you know, how can you still participate in contributing to building the space, but in a way that is also safe for you psychologically, that perhaps, in a couple years, in 5 years, that you can be sort of more front facing with the vulnerable communities, right? Maybe right now is not the time, but maybe later on. So that's kind of what I was thinking through with some folks in that quote. Um, but another thing, if I can just add, is especially for women of color, this feeling like you're representing your entire like heritage, like your ethnicity, um and fear is that connection, right? Because you're afraid of failing, because then if you fail, then what does it say about all Asian women? What does it say about all Chinese women, for example, right? So it's like, if I stay here, then I can be a good representation, but that's not true, right? Because then it's like, how do we understand failure within an organizational leadership perspective, but also as ourselves, as people?
Yes, and that's a lot to ask. And I think I was even thinking of like many women who have worked in this space of gender equality, um, in our faith-based sector, and have sort of gotten burned by leadership teams and other board of directors. And there's been a lot of, there's been a lot of conversation around women's getting burned in this area. And then, I've seen some women just take a step back and say like, okay, I'm still passionate, I still care, but for my mental health, I cannot be an advocate in this space right now, because I need to heal myself and heal what's going on and work with God on those things. And it doesn't mean that you're giving up the cause, you're just taking some, and that's also part of the stewardship of this. So awesome thoughts. Let's speak to the leaders. If you are a leader in the sector, what are some steps you need to be doing? Nikki, you spoke to the financial elements, But we had a great quote from you yesterday on our socials, which was, it's not only about policy, it's not only about, getting the procedures right. It still has to do with people, and it's a transformation. So can you maybe speak to that a bit? Like, what do we need to do in leadership that has to do with individuals?
Mm. You all may hate this answer, but this is what I got today. The best thing a leader can do right now is to pick one thing and do it deeply. Pick one thing and do it deeply. One of my clients is a professional sports team. And the very first week that we worked together, I said, okay, tell me what you want to do. And you know what they did? They sent me a 17 uh, piece slide deck of their 17 pillars for diversity. 17? Like, wait a minute. So you're going to go from 0 to 17. Okay, then you might be, I told them this. I said, you might be the first organization I have ever worked with that went from 0 to 17, right? And so why I say that is pick one thing. Many times this is very American, by the way. I don't know if this happens in our other cultures that are represented on the call, but it's kind of like, if we don't have 17 things, we're not doing enough. But the problem is, when we have 17 things, it almost guarantees that we're not going to do enough. Pick one thing. Some of you have been thinking about a multicultural mentorship or development program since 2020. Why has it not started? Because you've been trying to also launch 16 other things, right? Like, no, do that for 12 months. Like, develop it. Talk to people. Don't just write about it. Like, engage with people, have coffees, have conversations, have workshops, have people in your office, invite people on the trips with you. Pick one thing and do it deeply. And here's what I would say to that quote, Eva, that you mentioned is, have it be people related, not policy related. I mean, honestly, if I had to pick one or two things, now I'm not saying policy doesn't matter. It does. And if I had 7 days only to work on cultural diversity work, and you told me I either pick people or policy, you know what I'm picking? People. People. Most of us would prefer policy if we're honest. You know what? Because policy is safe. With policy, all we have to do is be in the words. So we can live, we can live for years in the words, and it's all words until we have to have an actual conversation with someone, right? Particularly if you're an introvert, right? You're like, no, I'll be over here in the policy. You will find me over here trying to get Juneteenth as a holiday, right? I mean, so that's what I would say, Eva, is the best thing we can, that many of you maybe can do, is just pick one thing and do it deep, not wide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really valuable counsel from someone who works with organizations. So you see this a lot. Joy,
Every
go
day.
ahead. Yeah.
Uh,
Joy, what do you have to add?
I think just a quick add to what Nikki just said is also that for leaders, like, this is gonna be exhausting. It's got, and then to have the courage to take that on. Um, because it like, it's not gonna be an easy, like, it's gonna be extra time. But at the same time, that is part of the culture shifting work, that investment work that is gonna be transformative for your organization. Um, and and I think for leaders who are allies, one thing would be to already see who's in your room. Like, one thing to be raising up, like, folks who are already there, because so much is like, oh, I got to hire more women, I got to hire, more diversity. But it's like, well, who's already there? Who can you already be building up? And then they become, because they have all of your, your institutional knowledge, like they are already there, they're game, so how do you build them up so that they, and when you hire more, you can retain your new staff, you can retain incoming emerging leaders. So what does that investment look like for you?
Great, great, great word from both of you. Excellent advice. We had said a couple of years ago that in 2025, the majority of the workforce is going to be millennials. Now, I haven't checked the stats right now because we're nearly at 2025. I'm not sure if like the boomers retired at the rate that we calculated. So if it's going to be exactly that, but a lot of millennials going to be working in our organizations. Um, what are some of the things you have both alluded to this, talked about the younger folks already, but what have you seen and what are some of the things that young people want from our organization? What are the sort of um, they're not going to make any, cut you any slack as an organization. What are some things you're seeing? Go ahead, Joy.
Sure. I mean, the two things that have come to mind that I've heard, also myself being a millennial, um, is is flexibility, just work flexibility, trusting, that there is a collegial trust there that work's gonna get done. Like you're gonna hit your deliverables, but what is that flexibility in time and space that I'm hearing a lot of folks are interested in? And it's not because they don't want to be part of office environments. They do, right? But that flexibility does then allow for more enriching work-life experience. Um, and then the other thing is maternity from women that I've heard, right? Like how can that policy be true and 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 for more women in the Christian relief and development space.
Young people want relationship. And depending on your own come from, your cultural come from, they want to know their leaders. They don't want to get random cold emails dictating what's going to happen from the top. They want to know why. They want to know, is this person trustworthy? They want to have had lunch with you. And I know for some people you're like, I'm not here for that. Just get your work done. Well, if half of your staff is under 30 or under 35, then quite frankly, you are not treating them like a culture group. They are a culture group, just like any other culture group that you would address an issue with. They want relationship. The other thing I see, they want recognition.
Mm.
I mean, they do. And what I counsel my senior leaders that I coach who fight this is it takes you 5 seconds to run into somebody's office, poke your head in there and say, I really appreciate your work. What I find with most leaders these days, senior leaders they're a little bit older, is the only time they have something to say to their staff is when they're not getting it right. And so I find that they just want recognition and they want it publicly and privately. And so as leaders, I have philosophy is that's on us to get better, not to fight it or to try to make them like us, right? I mean, talk about cultural dominance, right? I mean, if you're over 35 and you're like, no, they just need to get it together like me, careful with that one. That's an othering, right? Instead, to look at your younger workforce, know that they are a culture group. They have certain values, they have certain wants, all the things that Joy mentioned too, that like they may not be for you, but as a leader, your responsibility is to say, okay, what are some things that actually we can make that happen? And what are some things that I need to communicate to say, I don't care what age group you're from, that's not happening. Most leaders are afraid to do that. They are afraid to say what we're not going to do. And I think that's where transformation really lies in our organizations. So relationships and recognition is what I see.
Excellent inputs and great things to learn. I've personally, Nikki, that last point, have learned that the hard way as a leader. Really, the recognition at all turns, like that is very important too. Folks want to know they're doing a good job. Yeah, that's really valuable. And Nikki and Joy will both be speakers at the Belonging Conference. If you all would like to come and join us in Philadelphia next month for this conference, I'm going to pray us out. Thank you, everyone, so much.